Welcome back. More than 190 countries have adopted the Paris Agreement, a legally binding international treaty on climate change reached at COP21 in 2015. The agreement aims to keep a rise in global temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels by the end of this century. Now, climate change is dominating conversations right now, and in many countries have made pledges for energy transition, and we are on a race to net zero. John Owajimogu, Energy and Infrastructure Leader, EY, joins me to discuss this climate change implications for Nigeria's energy sector and more. Good afternoon, John. Good to have you in the studio.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Now, it seems that this energy climate situation is really impacting Nigeria's oil and gas industry, especially with the flooding we've had now. Many oil majors have had to, called force majeure, at this moment. Even LNG at one point, but they came with a reback saying that they're still in operations. How do you see this? What impact, how much impact do you think this is having on our industry at the moment?
Well, you're referring to the floods that impacted the gas fields that feed into the LNG. And one may say that flood is a natural phenomenon, but our scientists will say the impact of climate change is that the intensity and occurrence of it is happening more regularly. So in that respect, we are now beginning to feel its impact locally given the disruption to gas flow. However, in the industry, climate change really represents an existential threat in the sense that it has implications of disrupting established business models on how we produce and consume energy, given that the energy sector is on top of the food chain in terms of contribution contribution in carbon emission. But you can see precisely why, and that's because energy is the lifeblood of our livelihood. It impacts everything we do. Is the engine that drives all activities, whether directly or indirectly. So it's not surprising then that the oil and gas industry is in the epicenter of the conversation around what needs to happen to stem the impact of climate change.
And so we'll look at it, say that we're trying to curb climate change emissions, achieve net zero, but we say human activities are very crucial here. Right. Some would say that the energy sector is a major driver for the impact of climate change that we're experiencing right now, and Africa being the major, being at the receiving end of this is more like, where do we stand here? How do we come out of this when we really survive on fossil fuels?
True, and a point I would like to make in responding to that is that Africa contributes 3.8% of the global emissions, which is very negligible. And to put that in context, so for Nigeria, that's even less than 1%. So to put that in context, and in a way, that's a reflection of our low energy access and low levels of industrialization. So any conversation around dealing with the impact of climate change would have to recognize that disparity in the contribution between the more industrialized countries and African countries that still are dealing with existential needs of providing energy security to their citizens and fueling the industrialization that will drive them out of poverty and provide food security and all of those things that are within the social development goals of the UN. So in that context, there needs to be the idea of a just transition and ethical transition is being discussed, which is that we need to recognize the disparity of our contribution to global warming between the global north, the industrialized nations, and the global south, the least industrialized nations, and recognizing that we have an urgent need to provide security to our citizens and to drive industrialization. So that disparity needs to be understood. And a compact, I believe, has to be reached between the global south and the global north. In particular for Africa, I think a concerted effort is required. African countries should have one voice in discussing what pathway to energy transition that we should have, recognizing that fossil fuel may be required in the short to medium term for us to get to that point where we can then transition into cleaner energy, given that the global north, polluted the planet on their trajectory to prosperity. Now, I don't subscribe to the narrative that there's a linear pathway to development. We don't have to follow the same pathway that the global north followed.
Okay.
Like, we don't have to go sequentially from coal to gas to petroleum. There can be a leapfrog. However, that leapfrog is very expensive. See, the energy ecosystem cannot be transformed cheaply or quickly,
okay,
right?
So speaking of the pathways and the cost of financing this transition, the road to net zero, what should African governments really be focusing on to really achieve what we need and to be able to fight climate change, provide security, as you mentioned, to curb the impact of this on our agriculture and other aspects of our sectors of our economies?
And what is interesting is that the Nigerian government has come out upfront and identified gas as the bridge fuel towards reaching net zero. So recognizing that gas, and given that this is a resource that we have huge endowment of, 9th largest in the world, provides that bridge for us to slowly transition into cleaner energies. It's a cleaner burning fuel than crude oil, and it also has huge capacity for energy storage and can be that foundation for us to now start incorporating other cleaner energies like renewable energy. However, most of the finance and most of the support that comes from development of gas or even for the transition to renewable energy, unfortunately, still comes from the global north. So for for African countries, that's why I said there's a need for a compact in saying, do we need to develop an energy bank to make sure we can finance, even if the global north were to say, okay, we think renewables is the pathway, and that's what we're going to support, and we're going to withdraw support from fossil fuels, which is something we're already seeing in the market. A lot of banks or finance houses are increasingly looking away from fossil fuels. Then we are left to our own circumstances. And I think this is where the collective strength of the 53 countries in Africa, in speaking in one voice, in coming together and developing an energy roadmap, and that could be in the form of an energy bank, in being able to finance our own energy development to make sure we meet our peculiar needs of energy access and industrialization.
So just speaking of, is this what's currently going on with industry stakeholders at the moment? Because you look at rising energy prices, especially for gas in Nigeria, price of gas is skyrocketing. So do you think they can achieve this cleaner energy part that we're looking at? Is it realistic? Is it achievable at the moment? Just in a quick point.
It's to arrest the impact of climate change will require a concerted effort among all stakeholders beyond the oil and gas industry. So, for example, agriculture and land use related to agriculture is the second largest emitters of carbon. And so when you think about it, even if you were to take away the contributions of the energy industry, you're talking about maybe at most 40%. There's still quite a, which is significant, but there's still quite a lot that's being done by other industries, and also energy indirectly impacts those other industries. So it requires a concerted effort across the stakeholder spectrum. And that's what I'm saying, where there's that compact between the North and the South in being able to provide, whether it's technology, whether in terms of other support, whether it's financing, in enabling companies and countries to easily transition.
Thanks so much for this. We're hoping that this concerted efforts, actually comes to fruition and, births good fruits for Nigeria and Africa as a whole. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, John Owajimogu, Energy and Infrastructure Leader, EY, for joining us to discuss this crucial matter today.
Thank you.